Alright, so this week we're going to do something I had done at Photoshop World last year in my visual effects class, and we're going to it's an interesting way to present a photo in that we're going to create a reflection of a photo. While that seems simple enough, we're going to reflect it on the surface of a body of water that we're going to create entirely in Photoshop. So let's begin by creating the water surface first. So here I have a blank document. I'm going to go ahead and create a new blank layer. And just so you know, if I go into the image size here, I'm working with a 8x6 inch at 150 dpi image. So on my new blank layer, I'm going to go over here in my toolbar, choose my rectangular marquee tool, and I'm just going to draw a box right in the middle of the document, all the way up from top to bottom and just kind of very narrow in the center here. Now, I'm going to fill this with a clouds filter. I want to make sure that my foreground and background colors are set to the default black and white. Let's go into the filter menu and choose render clouds. And it will give us that fill there. I'm going to go and deselect by pressing Command or Control D, and I'm just going to bring up Free Transform by pressing Command T. And I'm just going to take these side handles here and just drag them to the edge of my document. And what this is going to do is kind of stretch out that clouds filter. In fact, I'm going to probably stretch it out a little bit more. And we'll just press Enter. Now I don't need those excess areas that are extending beyond the boundaries here, so I'm going to press Command or Control A and just go under Image and go to Crop. And while we don't see any visible change, if I take the document and slide it over, those excess edges are now gone. Well, now the next step is we need to apply a little bit of a blur in here. While we did stretch this out and it's got a lot of things going on, I want to make it a little bit smoother. So we're going to go into the filter menu and go to Blur, Motion Blur. I want to make sure the angle is set to 0, so the blur is going straight from left to right. And a very minimal distance, we're going to keep it around 25 pixels. Let's click OK, and there we have it. Well, now we're going to go under Filter again, and this time we're going to go down here to Sketch and choose Chrome. And in this giant window, you kind of close this in a little bit, you can see what we're getting here is kind of an interesting water surface effect. And it's pretty much giving us exactly what we're looking for. You can mess with the sliders here and get a different result. You see if I increase the detail, it gives me a little bit more detail in the water. I actually want to keep the detail relatively low. I'm going to keep it at around 1. And the smoothness, I'm going to go ahead and leave it 10. If you can see, if I drag the smoothness down a little bit, it gets a little grainy in some areas, and that's not really what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and keep it all the way up to 10, keeping it really smooth. So let's go ahead and click OK. And there we have that. Now, I'm going to press Command or Control T to bring up Free Transform once again. Now I'm going to grab this top middle handle and just push this down towards the middle, so that horizon line's right about in the middle there. Now, keeping it still in Free Transform, I'm going to Control or right click directly on it, and we'll get this flyout menu, and I'm going to choose Perspective. I'm going to grab either one of these bottom corner handles and just drag outward. And you can see it's giving me an interesting perspective on that water. You can drag it out a little bit more, and we'll just press Enter. So now it looks like it's kind of receding back in space a little bit, which is exactly what we want. Well, I'm going to increase the contrast of this overall graphic a little more by duplicating that layer and just simply changing the blend mode to overlay. And you see it gets a little bit more contrasty. If it's a little too much, you can certainly drop the opacity, or feel free to change the blend mode. Maybe the soft light is a little bit more subtle, as you can see. So I think I'm going to go ahead and stick with that. I'm going to go ahead and merge those two layers together by pressing Command or Control E. Now, I'm going to highlight that background layer and simply give it a 50% gray fill. So press Shift Delete, and we'll get the fill dialog here, 50% gray, and there we have it. So now what I want to do is actually save what I'm looking at here as a separate file for the displacement map that we're going to use this for. So I'm going to go under the Save, or the File menu, go to Save As, and we're going to make sure that we're saving this to the desktop here. And we'll just call it Displaced. And make sure we're going to the desktop, and it's going to make sure it's a Photoshop format, and we're going to save it as a copy because we want it to be flattened. So check on as a copy and check off layers. And what this will do is basically flatten the image and save it as a flattened Photoshop file all in one step. So now we'll go and do that, click Save, and there's our document right there. So now, let's go ahead and bring in the image that we want to generate the reflection of, which I've got right here. So I'm just going to take this photo and just take my Move tool and drag and drop it. If you hold down the Shift key while dragging and dropping, it will pop it right in the middle of your document. So I'm just going to move this up a little bit. Let's zoom in here, get a better look. I'm going to go ahead and scale this photo up just a hair and kind of position it right about there. I'm going to drag down and create a duplicate of this photo, or this layer, and I'm going to flip this duplicate layer, or vertically rather. So I'm going to go to the edit menu, go down here to transform, flip vertical. Then let's just simply drag our object down. I'm going to hold down the shift key so to constrain it from up and down. Drag it right down until it snaps to the bottom edge of the original photo, right like that. Well, now in this layer, we're going to apply the displacement map that we created. So what I'm going to do first is actually go ahead and convert this object or this layer into a smart object. So I'm going to control or right click directly on it, and we'll go up here to convert to smart object. This way we can apply the filter as a smart filter in the event we want to change it. Because once you apply a filter to a regular layer, it's pretty much done. You'd have to go back and undo it and then reapply it. A smart filter gives you the advantage of going back and fixing something even after you've applied it. So let's go into the filter menu, go to distort, and go to displace. And for the horizontal scale, since our water is going on a horizontal stretch here, I'm going to make this higher than my vertical scale. So I'm going to set the horizontal scale to about 25. And the vertical scale I'm going to set to about 5. We want to stretch it to fit, and we'll just go ahead and check on wraparound. And then we'll click OK, and it's going to get the open dialog asking me which displacement map I want to use, which right there is on my desktop is the one I want. And when I click open, you can see that now it distorts my photo based on that displacement map. And it conforms nicely to the water it's beneath. So now all I need to do is I'm going to create a layer mask on this image, and using the gradient tool, let's make sure we're using a foreground to transparent and make sure that the foreground color is set to black. I'm going to come into the bottom of this document, hold down my shift key, and just drag upward to the bottom edge of the original photo, and then we get a nicely faded reflection right inside the water there. Well, now this doesn't look like water. It's all gray and everything like that. Well, all I need to do here is I could go in here and probably apply a color to these, but what I'm going to do is just simply add an adjustment layer above them. We go to hue saturation here, click colorize, and we can just give it any color we want. Let's go with a blue here. Increase that saturation. Maybe make it a little bit darker. And because it's an adjustment layer, if I set a color and click OK, and you decide, I don't like that much, simply double click that adjustment layer and change it to your liking. So I think that looks pretty good. Click OK. So now I've got that photo reflecting in the water. In fact, I'm going to nudge the original photo up just a little bit so there's kind of a space between that and the lettering there, or that and the reflection. And then one last thing I want to do is this background here. I'm going to create a new blank layer right above that background gray layer. And let's go over here and let's actually use a gray color, kind of a 50% gray right about here. And using that same gradient tool we did on the layer mask, I'm just going to draw a gradient down from the bottom here. Now it doesn't show up because it's the same gray as the one here, but by changing the blend mode to multiply, we're getting a darker color toward the top there. Now that I'm looking at it, I don't seem to like that gap between the original photo and the reflection, so I'm going to drop that down just a little bit more, right about there. But there we pretty much have it. So we've taken that photo and created a surface of water and reflected that photo into it. But we've created all that from scratch, and again, as I mentioned, if I wanted to distort this image a little bit more, I don't have to go and reapply it. If I simply double click the displace here in the layers, I can modify my existing settings on this particular layer. So let's say I want to make the horizontal scale even more. Let's go up to 50 and see what it does. It's going to ask me to find the displacement. And there's the before and after. So it gives it a little bit more distortion. I think I like that. But I have that freedom to go in there and make that change without going out and reapplying the filter. So there it is, fun with displacement maps, reflections, and smart filters.